I'd like to thank and welcome Dr. Jeevan Sivalingam. Sorry, Jeevan, I hope I said your last name correctly. Um, so he is a dentist who graduated from the University of Queensland in 2005, and he founded the dental group My Dentist Network in 2010, with which now has 4 locations and 15 general dentists and specialists working with him. So he will be going through how to follow the numbers at your practice, and we'll be taking you through how Jeevan Analytics also works. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll pass you over to Dr. Jeevan, and I'll put myself on, I'll ask him to unmute. What I will ask is during this presentation, if you have any questions, make sure that you just pop them into the Q&A section of the screen or the poll section, and I will go through them at the end unless is something that needs to be answered straight away. Okay, guys. So thank you so much for logging in on time, and I'll hand over to Dr. Jeevan.
Okay, thank you, Rebecca. So hi guys. So today I'm going to be talking about just data analysis of your clinic. So what KPIs, what metrics you should be using to gauge the success of your business. So what I might do is, so yes, a bit about me. I'm a dentist from UQ, and basically my frustration of lack of data reporting in general, just being able to get all the information I need, led me to found this company called Jeevan Analytics, which is the market-leading business intelligence software. So today we're going to be talking about metrics in general. You can try to, we'll show you some ways to look at metrics by yourselves, and we'll kind of go through one by one which metrics you should be using for, regardless of how you want to do it. So for me, the power of data is unquestionable these days. It's basically what Google, Amazon, Facebook, all the biggest companies have built their billion-dollar businesses on. And the quote that I always like to kind of refer to is one by James Harrington, and it says that measurement is the first step that leads to control and to improvement. If you can't measure something, you can't understand it. And if you can't understand it, you can't control it. And if you can't control it, you can't improve it. And yeah, to me, that's in a nutshell why I love data so much, is that you have to have something measurable if you want to improve something. So why do we need data? So the first one is visibility. So how do you know what's happening in your business? So, when you're a single chair operator and it's just you kind of have a good idea of every single thing that's happening in your business. But as you grow, things start to change. You bring in an associate or an OHT, and suddenly you don't know what's happening on the days that you're not there. You potentially might be a multi-site owner, in which case you really need good visibility using objective data, not rumors of, this staff member said this person's not doing their work or this person said this. Objective data, so you know exactly what's going on in your business. The second thing for me is how we make decisions. And every decision should be made based on data. And, I think a good example of that is when do we add another chair, another shift, or another associate? When I look at something like that, I look at utilization rate. So how busy is my clinic? And, I have a particular metric. So once I hit, say, 90% utilization rate is when I would look at opening up another chair. For others, it might be that they need to be booked out 2 weeks in advance. But regardless of what your metric is, it should be based on hard data, not let's go up to my reception and say, oh, does it feel busy? Maybe, maybe not. Okay. The third thing is benchmarking. So, particularly for the larger clinics or multi-site clinics, you kind of want to know how each dentist is performing. You want patients to have very similar experiences no matter who they see. You don't really want them to have a really superior experience when they see you because you're the principal dentist, and have a really terrible experience when they see maybe one of your younger associates. So that benchmarking is really important to make sure that everyone in your group or everyone in your single clinic is, performing at a level that you're happy with. And finally, how do we improve? So, for me, KPIs and metrics aren't just about, the return on investment for the business. A lot of it is ensuring you deliver optimal health outcomes. Every hospital, every medical center around the world uses data to analyze these things. And why, as dentists, we're not doing it, to me, is something that we need to fix. So, in the last couple of months, I've kind of spoken to maybe every large corporate. We're not the ASX listed, we're not the major health funds. And, one thing I've found is that they are data obsessed. Almost all the big guys have spent millions, I mean millions of dollars in data warehouses, and they literally have business analysts whose job it is to assess the data on a daily basis. Some of them use our platform and some of them use both. But, for me, when I see on the forums people saying that corporate's biggest advantage is that they get an extra 10% off their GICs, it's really missing the point. The biggest advantage is they understand business really well and they are looking at the data in a way that you really wouldn't realize. So for me, if you're not having metrics, you're not analyzing data yourself, you're going to be left behind and you're at a massive competitive disadvantage. So in terms of generally importance of metrics, yes, as we've said, if you can't measure, you can't improve. I do think metrics get a bad rep, and for me, whenever I talk about this to clients, I always say metrics and KPIs can be used for good or evil, and hopefully after this talk today, you will go and implement this for good and not for evil. It's not supposed to be punitive. It's not supposed to be to kind of hammer your staff or your associates. It's supposed to be to improve everyone. It's really good to be able to do these reviews with your associates and stuff. About how a good way to do that is. Data-driven decisions, of course, and from a business point of view, return on investment. We're right at the end. We'll talk about what kind of return on investment you actually get. Why the big boys are doing this so much? Because return on investment on data analysis is probably more than any other kind of thing that you'd be looking at. So how to collect data? So for most of you, it's going to be for dental Windows users, it's downloading reports, maybe through CSV files, and combining that with manual entry. Some things can be reported on using your PMS, some things can't. The issues with it is, often manual entry is prone to error. When we used to do this, and we used to do this for years, the person doing the data entry was often the person being assessed, which obviously is a big conflict there. So there's a lot of game in the system. And again, often it's retrospective data. We used to do it every month. And by the end of the month, that data is quite old. So, how you can export this is, you can use it then for Windows reporting, download the CSV files, import it to Excel and Google Sheets. Or, what I actually did for years was I used Microsoft Power BI, which is a really helpful tool. It's pretty complex. You have to kind of be really good at IT to use it. If you can get the hang of it, that's a good option as well. So for me, ideal features of data collection, ideally, is a non-PMS. And that's, you get the data from your PMS. But for me, for security reasons, I'd like to keep things separate. It should be automated and it should be real time. If you talk to any business analyst, no one wants to see snapshots. No one wants to see points of time. What they want to do is analyze trends. That's what analysis really means, is looking at long-term trends. And when you're dealing with your dentist, it's also ensuring that you're respecting the boundaries of SFAs. Most of us have our dentists under service facility agreements, and it's really important to kind of ensure that you keep those boundaries when you do your data when you do your reviews, because legally these days we can't be seen to be coaching our employees in certain respects. When you are showing your data to others, so when we're talking about staff or your dentist, curation of the data is so important. I get pitched almost on a weekly basis a new graph, a new stat. Jeevan, why don't you look at this stat? And for me, every metric must lead to behavioral change. Otherwise, don't put it in. Once you have too many metrics, you get this paralysis by analysis. It's just overload, and in the end, no one concentrates on anything. The second thing is who's looking at this data, who are you presenting it to? So this, dentists were university educated, we're probably good with numbers. You can pitch it a certain way to them. For staff, often they're more visual, less into numbers. You need to make sure that when you're presenting data, it's a way that your audience can understand. Cool. So let's start going through some of these metrics. And we'll start off by talking about just the health overall of a dental clinics. And so for me, these metrics are just a couple of small little keys that really should be at the minimum that you're looking at. Now remember, there's only so many levers of growth for a dental clinic. You've got your inorganic ones, which is to do with patient flow. So that's, you can go out and buy a clinic, or you can do a startup, and of course you're going to grow your group. You can spend a lot of money on external marketing. But in terms of organic, you're really down to three things. The first one would be how to improve, and to me, some of the levers of growth are actually at the clinic level, the site level. It's not, at your manager level. It's actually the boots on the ground that really makes a difference. So for me, the first one is associate progression. So how do you improve the dentists? And let's be honest, they represent 100% of the patient fees. And that comes down to how they're diagnosing, are they able to execute what they diagnose, and then communication. So are they getting case acceptance? The second biggest thing is front desk conversion. I'm massive on front desk. I drill my techniques to my front desk all the time. For staff, the other thing for me is staff accountability. Often, you do a meeting, you say, let's do this. For the first 2 or 3 weeks, it works out really well. Then everyone loses steam. You forget about it. You have a sheet that's somewhere in some cupboard, some folder, and you forget all about it. So for me, making sure you keep staff accountable is really, really important. So as a snapshot, in terms of the pulse of dental clinic, the first one you'll be looking at is production versus collection. So production is how much you invoice. Collection is how much you receipt. Traditionally, in overseas market like America, the difference between production and collection would be massive. In America, you charge $1,000 for a crown with say Delta. You have what we call write-downs, and you end up only collecting $300 of it. In Australia, traditionally, production and collection have been pretty much on par until recently, and the big difference now is payment plans. My clinic uses NDP or HUM, which has been brilliant for us, and that's kind of making production and collection a little bit different, even though HUM does pay up front. And the other thing is ortho. The second thing is number of visits. So for me, that represents how busy my clinic is. Have you ever had a month where you're like, oh, it doesn't really feel really busy, but then you check your production, it's actually really high? And often that's because you've done some higher value treatments that's kind of papered the cracks. So gauging the number of visits overall is really important for me to kind of understand how busy we are. And finally, if you combine the two, you get a metric called production per visit. And that's probably the key. What is your production per visit? The other two big ones I like to look at the clinic level is utilization rate. So what is the percentage of available appointments used? And that is important to me because it determines when we add another chair or another shift. I like to also look at a clinician level to see what their utilization rate is because, I often find that there's a reason why one dentist's utilization rate is really low, and that's their rebooking rate and their communication or the number of procedures. So for me, if there's an outlier, if everyone's utilization rate is low, I know it's a problem at the clinic level. Maybe we need to spend more marketing. If it's one particular dentist, I know I need to kind of spend some time with that dentist, do a bit more, see how we can improve that particular dentist. Second metric is patient attrition. Now, I know there are some probably Jeev users here, and I know we don't show patient attrition. Don't worry, it's coming. It was in a bit of a something that I missed when we did development about 2 years ago, but it will be in your G platform fairly soon. So patient attrition is how many patients are leaving your office through the back door. So you're flooding Google ads, you're spending money on Facebook ads and keeping your clinic going. But at the same time, all these patients are leaving. So how we calculate attrition rate is we look at total patients, and we use total patients as how many patients have been seen in the last 30 months. And we subtract total active patients. So active patients are people who have been within the clinic in the last 18 months and divide by total active patients. And that gives you the attrition rate. So to me, one is showing the business of your clinic, and the other one is showing, what is your retention essentially of your patients. Cool. So next thing we'll move on to is dentists. So dentists are probably the biggest metrics that you're going to be looking at. There's such a fallacy that dentists don't want KPIs or metrics. Hopefully there's a lot of dentists on tonight. We are geeks, we're the guys who actually look forward to our report cards, right? And suddenly, we're used to being great at high school, university, and then we get into private practice and something all disappears. And, my experience with dentists is that they actually love to see how they're improving and have things that they can work on. What they don't want is to have targets set by overlords. Back in the day, I used to have this data on an Excel spreadsheet, and I used to call them into my office for review. And my dentist hated it. They would change their ringtone to Darth Vader for me and make jokes about how, I'm this evil overlord. And often it can be quite adversarial. And to me, that's not how you should be doing reviews. Reviews should be ideally that they have access to their own data, they can make their own assumption and come to you for that help. It shouldn't be adversarial. It shouldn't be, you must do X amount of crowns or otherwise you're fired kind of thing. It should be there to improve them. And again, it should respect the boundaries of an SFA. So for me, I break down the types of dentists there are. You've got the new and recent grads who are just learning, and they are, what you'll find with them is that their improvement, if you coach them, if you help them well, is dramatic, but they're going to make mistakes. You've got the super GPs who they post on Facebook every other day where they can do a perfect RCT on an upper 7, then do braces and then put an implant in. And, I think they're rare, to be honest. I don't think they're as common as you see on Facebook. You've got the special interest GPs. There's a famous dentist on Facebook, Shami, who actually works with me, who posts all those memes. So he basically does only orthodontics. You've got the slow and steady dentists as well, who are just happy in their little mode. I'd say that's probably the bulk of dentists who do your drill and fill, exos, single unit crowns here or there, and then you've got other groups. So for me, when we start looking at some of the metrics, I'm going to show you the reason why I want to look at these, particularly long-term trends, is I want to see how they progressed. So, I take on a lot of new grads, so I want to see how they progress from the new grad level and how they progress each year. I want to see where CPD helped. So, if we're investing in CPD, I want to see a return on investment. And for me, I also want to use this data to determine the remuneration. For me, when somebody comes to me to discuss their pay, it's a financial discussion. It's not about how much I like them. So for me, I need to relate this to financial metrics. And that's really important to me. I don't think people's pay, particularly for dentists, should be associated with how many days the Earth has rotated around the sun. It should be based on a financial discussion. So for me, what I find is, when I've analyzed, and as I say, I've also got a lot of associates, and I've had them from new grad to often, 8-9 years out. So I can see their progression. And for me, they all dramatically improve in their first year. For some of them, the stuff that they do in their first year, that they got that competency that they get to at the end of the first year, is where they kind of stay. For some of them, they keep improving and then they start to plateau, which is the orange line. So I did this in Paint. Everyone's made fun of me about this graph because, yeah, we are part of a software company. I'm doing stuff on Paint. But that orange plateau is often because life starts taking over. You're young, you become a dentist, but suddenly you start looking at, hey, maybe I'm going to get married, maybe I'm going to go buy a house, maybe I'm going to start doing traveling, and suddenly dentistry stops being an issue. Hopefully, by looking at these metrics, you can start to get them, once those kind of things start to fade away or start to stabilize, you start to get that improvement again. And then you got the blue line, which is the guns. Some of those dentists who just get to that really high level within 2 or 3 years, and then eventually it plateaus. I mean, no one can skyrocket forever, but they just keep improving. And they're the dentist geeks that you probably see on some of the forums, right? So for me, the formula that we look for in the dentist, the three things that combine to make a great dentist is the ability to diagnose. And I always get frustrated with some of my dentists who don't take enough X-rays or don't take photos because you can't diagnose what you can't see. Then do they have the skills to execute that? And that's where CPD comes in. And finally, case acceptance. Are they communicating it? You can, I've met some of the best technical dentists I've ever seen. They'll show me these crazy cases, but their communication skills suck, and they just don't get to do many of they're going to get to showcase this because no one goes ahead with treatment. So for me, these are the three pillars of making a successful dentist. Cool. So what are the top clinician metrics? So the three probably big ones you want to look at is hourly rate, reappointment rate, and new patient number. Now we all gravitate towards hourly rate, but you should never ever look at hourly rate in isolation because it can hide different things. So you need to look at hourly rate in conjunction with the reappointment rate and how many new patients they're seeing as a proportion of your clinic. So the reason for that is if you're, I know if you look back, some of the dentists on this forms, you look back younger years, and often what would happen is, you get a patient for an exam, and suddenly you slam them. You do 3 or 4 fill-ins, you might do a crown prep, and you do all this work. But the thing is, you never see them again, right? So your hourly rate is really high, but at the same time, the owner is just having to keep feeding you new patients. I call those dentists new patient black hole dentists. So because they're not rebooking, because they're slamming, their hourly rate's really high, but their reappointment's really low, and the number of new patients that I have to keep feeding them is really high. So, bear in mind, don't try to set the hourly rate as the only metric that you're using to assess your dentist or talk to them about. Normally, hourly rate is a function of a few other metrics. In terms of rebooking rate, and if my good friend Kapil is on this webinar, but one of the kind of things that we've just worked on is this immediate feedback. So prior to our G platform, what we used to try and do is put different statuses on our appointments and to try to give dentists immediate feedback of has the patient reappointed. So think about it, you see a patient, you say, oh, look, come in for this crown, you give your bits, patient's like, yeah, so positive, you go out to the front, you leave the receptionist, you go back to your room, and you actually know if they booked in. So for me, being able to see that immediate feedback of how you're going throughout the day, knowing which of your communication techniques worked well, which didn't, maybe you're late with your patients, how that's affecting things, that immediate feedback is really important. So what we do with for our platform is we have a daily huddle that they see that the dentist logs into the morning. It tells them little things like are they do they have their x-rays overdue, do they have outstanding treatment, blah blah blah. But the cool thing that we just developed is this rebooked feature. So as they're going through their day, they can see that John Smith at 9 o'clock rebooked, but the next 2 people actually didn't rebook. And when we say rebook, that means they didn't book in for a recall if they had no treatment, or they didn't rebook for any actual treatment needed. So for me, that's really, really powerful. So, it's all very well to hope that your dentist will look at their data every day. It doesn't, no one's going to spend every weeknight looking through the data, but to get that immediate feedback on the important things, to me, is really, really important to help improve my dentist. The next thing is, I think people should be assessing treatment plans. It's actually, the hardest thing to kind of calculate. It's the one that me and Gary spend months trying to work out. So the things that you want to look at is, yes, overall, what is your completion rate? Out of the treatment plans that you present, what is the completion rate? But more than that is you want to look at what is the average fee proposed versus what is the average fee completed. So average fee proposed is basically looking at, is the dentist, proposing large treatment plans, or is everyone needing, one or two fillings? What is average fee completed is saying, out of those, what actually gets completed? The funny thing for me is, I get these young, keen, eager beaver new grads, they come up to me and go, Jeevan, I just booked in this full mouth rehab that, let's be honest, they don't know how to do. And I'm like, has the patient actually booked in? Then just go check the book. Oh no, they're thinking about it, but I'm pretty sure they're going to go ahead. And what happens is really none of them go ahead, right? And the average fee proposed is really high, but the average fee completed is very, very low. So that's why we kind of want to look at both in comparison. And then hopefully that's one thing that you'll kind of understand, is that you shouldn't look at one stat in isolation. So the other thing I want to do is I want to look at what procedures dentists are doing. So for me, what I really like to look at is proactive procedures. So, how do I look if a dentist is being proactive? Two of the biggest procedures that I like to look at is perio and splints. The reason for that is, one, they're preventative nature. The second is they don't cause pain. They're not obvious. So to communicate perio to me and to communicate past, why can't I just have a normal clean? To me, takes a lot of effort, takes a lot of skill, and to me shows the dentist who actually is passionate about their work. So those metrics I really like to see, because to me that really shows that a dentist I know is putting it, is really, putting in the time with their patients. Then we look at some of the, super GPs, the guys who are just doing craziness. Obviously I have a few of them, and I look at what procedures they're doing, and they're the ones who are doing the implants, the ortho stuff like aligners or braces, maybe endo retreatments because they're doing all the hardcore endos in your group or your clinic. So we kind of track those as well. The next thing I try to do is I look at particular predictor ratios. Have you ever, sat with a younger dentist? I know I'm picking on young dentists, but I'm getting old now. And you say to the dentist, "Oh, look, you seem to be doing a lot of extractions, or you don't do many indirect restorations." And they always say to you, "Well, the reason why I don't is that my patients don't need them." So and somehow their patient base is very different to yours or your other associates. So what I like to do is I like to track our large direct restorations to indirect ratios. And it's really good to kind of benchmark that across your group. So if they're doing a lot of really big composites, but not many indirect restorations. And for me, that's a nice conversation to have of, what is your criteria for indirect restorations? Is it based on what we got taught at university? Is it objective? Or are you kind of trying to diagnose the patient's wallet here? I like to look at exo to endo, and obviously we filter out wisdom teeth and deciduous teeth. To me, as much as, we don't want to say it, we have this unconscious bias. I find that all the dentists in my group who love endo have a really high endo to exo ratio. For me, when I get a patient who needs an upper 7 that's got a periorbital abscess, unconsciously I find that I'm extracting them a lot more than I'm saving them. The next one I talk about is RCT conversion. This was like a weird one. So I was with one of my young dentists a year ago, and I was like, "Hey, you don't do much RCTs, do you? You don't like them?" And she said to me, "Gee, I do heaps of it. And I only actually track obturations." So what I did for her is I looked at how many extirpations she had done. She had done heaps. I mean, heaps. but nobody was coming back. Now, if I had had that conversation, I hadn't looked at the data, I wouldn't have been able to know that. So I asked her, so how is your handover when they ask you, what do you tell the patients? And, it turned out she was just like, oh yeah, I'll see you when I see you, all good. And the patient was really confused. Do they have to come back? I'm out of pain. Do I not need to come back? So we had like a 15-minute chat about it. After that, her ratio suddenly went to almost 1-to-1. And again, this is the power of data, is that if you don't know what the problem is, you can't fix it. And most of the problems that happen is not because somebody is not clever, not trying their best. It's because they're just not aware of it. And that's why data, can really help grow your clinic and improve your dentist. So for me, when you're talking to your dentist, when you're doing the data analysis with them, is firstly give them the data. I get frustrated with some of our Jeev clients who haven't let their dentist look at the data yet. You need to. It's really, really important. It's the best ROI you will have in anything you do, period. Give them the data. So for us in our platform, they have their own logins where they can only see their own data. They don't get to see anything else. Second thing is, if you're have a clinic that has a few associates, or if you're multi-site, it's good. The first thing they say to me always is, how am I compared to everyone else? So for our feature, we anonymize everyone else's names, but they can see where they are in the group. And it gives them something to strive for. Next, avoid punitive targets. It should be more carrot than stick. Don't tell them they need to do X amount of crowns. Don't tell them, do this or you're fired. That's how to not get loyal associates. That's how to kind of drive your business downhill, I think. We help each other. And often I say to them, these are the metrics. You interpret how you want. And when you do that, often what will happen is they'll come to you and say, hey, how do I solve this problem? How do I've seen this in the data. It says that I'm not doing this very well. Jeevan, can we talk about, can you give me some tips as how to improve that? So, make it not adversarial. And again, always respect this. I don't know why I bring it up on every slide, it seems, respecting the SFA boundaries. So, I guess this comes down to when we're dealing with our corporate groups, they're really big on this. And for us, having those individual logins where they don't need permission from the owner allows you to respect the SFA boundaries. So that's why it's such a big thing, particularly for the corporate groups. Cool. So next thing we'll look at is front desk metrics. Cool. So, the big ones are going to be recall rate and reappointment rate. So recall rate from pre-book rate, so what percentage of patients come who present for a checkup and actually go ahead and pre-book their recall, and how many people actually turn the end. And then reappointment rate, obviously that's a big one as well. So how many patients are making another appointment? The other one that's really important to kind of track is FTA and UTA as a percentage. One of my clinics, and it's normally a new clinic, I will show you that new clinics will have a much higher FTA ratio than older clinics. And that's because as your clinic matures, you filter out a lot of these bad patients, right? Just through normal attrition. So for FTAs, we had noticed that one clinic would just be on the way, be fully booked for Thursday. And then by Thursday morning, it would just fall apart. And the problem is that by the time I realized what was happening, it had gone on for like a month or so. So, we sat down, we went through all these different language techniques, different protocols, and suddenly we were able to halve the FTA ratio. But you think about, what is your production per visit? Every time somebody FTAs, you miss out on that. So tracking that, I think, is really important. For Dental for Windows users, I think there's like 100 different ways to track an FTA, but I'm sure there's some e-support forms for that. So follow-ups. So we all know that when a patient is in your office, the chance of them rebooking is very high. The minute they leave your office, trying to get them to rebook then is much harder. And the main reason is life takes over, right? There's much more important things than teeth for most people. So I'm sure for most of you guys, you've got some kind of follow-up system for your recalls, for unfinished treatment plans, FTAs, and internal referrals. For me, I want to analyze the conversion ratios of these follow-ups. So for 100 overdue recalls, I want to know at a reception level, that drill down, what is my conversion rate? What is my conversion rate on unfinished treatment plans? So if Bob needs a crown, got to the front desk and said, I need to check my roster, I'll call back, and we want to follow it up. What is the conversion rate per staff member of calling them back? I want to analyze that. The reason why I want to analyze that is I want to know, A, who's doing the calls, who's doing the heavy lifting. We all know that there's a few staff members who do 90% of the work and the few who just kind of float by. I also want to know what the success rate of each call is and of each staff member. And the reason for that is I want to know who should be doing the training. If I see one superstar receptionist in my clinic who's got a really high conversion rate, I don't want to be doing the training for my staff. I want hire him to be doing the training because she knows what she's doing. Whatever she's doing, it works. So for me, that drill down data is really important, and that's what we track as well. I use VoIP lines, VoIP phone systems. The company that I use is VoIP. So I actually also look down on the data of what time phones are ringing, what times phones are being missed. I find out one of my clinics, the missed call rate is really high. If you go up and talk to your receptionist, they're going to say to me, I never miss a call. Bullshit. Like, honestly, bullshit. I would say at least 1 in 5 phone calls get missed at any dental clinic in the country. Sometimes it goes really high. And looking at your phone data is really, really important, I think. Cool. Let's move on to marketing. Hope I'm not boring everyone. It's weird because you're looking at a PowerPoint. I don't get to see anyone, so I don't know if anyone's paying attention. Cool. So the first thing, when you're tracking your marketing is, number one is if you're paying a guy to do your SEO, and they're not giving you your own dashboards to track all the stuff, my advice is to fire them. To me, that's unforgivable. It's not hard to put Google Analytics or Facebook pixels into a dashboard and let your clients see it. So for me, hopefully all the marketing groups that you're using are giving you access to that. We don't do that on Jeev platform. Your SEO guys should really be doing that, to be honest. Me and Rebecca were just talking about how, one really cool thing to do is to be able to have the ability to track a patient's full journey. So from when they see an advert of yours to when they go through the steps and then when they make an online booking. I know not many people are doing that because I had to talk to, we got something changed with Centaur just a month ago to be able to kind of fix a little flaw on it. So I know not many clinics are doing that. I know that some of the corporates are though. Obviously, we want to track total new patients. This is where how many people come through the door through your marketing. Where the patients coming from? I just, again, something me and Rebecca just had to talk about with e-forms. Hope Rebecca behind me mentioning is, making sure your staff, whether you're using e-forms or not using a paper medical history, get them to fill out where has the patient come from, because you check your ROI of marketing. And finally, you want to know what is the new spend per new patient? How much is this costing you for every new patient that comes in the door? So what we do, and I'll just show you what our dashboard looks like. And 90% of this comes from your PMS data. But what we do is we look at new patient cost and we take your accounting data and your PMS data. We combine the two and we work out what your cost of new patient acquisition is. It's really important to kind of know that and also to tell your staff about that. So for some of you guys, it might be really high. You want to tell your staff, hey, every time you miss a phone call, you're not only missing this, you're also missing the customer lifetime value as well. Cool. So finally, we're going to move on to accounting metrics. So, for me, accounting metrics are something that's almost made overly complex when it shouldn't be, for years. And I use a pretty big firm. And, I catch up with them every 6 months or sometimes once a year if I'm really busy. They just give me this wad of profit and loss statements printed out from their Xero. And, I always say to them, you don't do, all you do is compliance. You don't do consulting. And they make it really difficult. And it should, for me, everyone should have a grasp on the basic accounting metrics, but you should have access to that data really simply. I was talking to a whole bunch of, for some reason, really, I talked to a lot of dentists, accountants who are married to dentists. And we're talking about these things, and they said to me, I'd say to them, so what is your staff expense, or what is this expense? And they're like, oh, it's in the zero, it's in my I'm like, so what is it? They're like, I don't know, but it's there. I know it's there, but what point of having this, having it there if you don't know what it is and you're not acting on it? So I think there's a lot of things that we can improve on. So the first thing is, as I think we spoke about earlier, is production versus collection. So if your production is really high but your collection is really low, often you can start running flow issues. The two big things that's going to be is payment plans and ortho. Ortho is heavy loaded up front, particularly if you do a lot of Invisalign, because they stagger the payments over 2 years if you're not using, if you're doing in-house payment plans or using like Denticare. But your bills come at the start, so that can cause significant cash flow issues. Talk to any orthodontist about this, and they'll tell you. The other kind of principle I want to talk about a little bit is discounting. I'm not saying that you shouldn't discount. There's often reasons for it. Nowadays, everyone's gap for checkup and cleans, and you have to kind of meet the market. But I think Kevin's on the call today, and we were talking about it just last week. Is when you discount, the cost of your service is still the same, right? So it has a dramatic impact on profit. So an example is if you sell a chair for $150, the cost of making that chair is $120. Your profit is $30 at 20%, right? But if you discount that chair by only 10% to $135, your profit is now $15, but your profit percentage goes down to 10%. So by discounting your overall fee of 10%, you've actually had a 50% reduction on your profit. So you scale that up to your whole clinic for the whole year. It has a dramatic effect on the profitability of your clinic. I think sometimes, particularly associates, don't understand that. They see somebody and say, "Oh, this nice person, I gave him this guest stand." I think you need to, bear that in mind. Expenses. So, to increase your profit, you've either got to increase the production, which obviously we'd love to do, or decrease your expenses, which, to be honest, is actually harder to do. We should be using benchmarks for this. And next slide, I'll show you what I think you should be aiming for. The important thing to here is you need to know these figures to decide on important things. So, when your staff ask you for your pay rise, are you, heavy loaded in your staff? Can you afford that pay? Or is there, have you been running too lean? When your Henry Schein rep or somebody says, I want to, why don't you buy this wand or this particular new GIC or whatever it is, how is your consumables looking in terms of your overall expenses? I just don't think people are looking at it, to be honest. And it's really, really important. And I think part of the reason why people don't look at it, it's really hard to get that data out of Xero and MyOb. So what we do is we, show it on a pie graph, and you just wave over it and it gives you the percentages. And these are what the benchmarks that we tell our clients to kind of look at. So, things like wages should be non-clinical, so non-dentist, 18 to 23%, rent 4 to 8%, marketing ranges between 2 to 5%, consumables 6 to 8%. Now, these are benchmarks are averages. Yes, they're going to vary. I will tell you that my consumable spend is considerably lower than that. It also depends on what stage of growth you're in. Early on, your rent is, if you do a startup, your rent percentage is going to be really high, right? And as you get busier and busier and you start filling out all the chairs, that comes down. The other thing is, the different types of clinics. So if you're a specialist clinic, it's going to be a different makeup. If you have a CEREC, your lab fees are going to be much lower, but your other bills might be higher. So remember, benchmarks are benchmarks, they're averages, right? But these are something really that I think you should be aiming for. If you can beat them, all good. But if your wages are like 26% of your consumables, 10, 12%, you need to kind of rein it in. Cool. So the other kind of thing, if I asked 100 dentists, what is your net profit? Most of them won't be able to tell me. And so remember, net profit is the income earned by your company minus the direct and indirect cost of producing the goods or service. So in that case, the industry. Always remember, net profit is after you pay yourself at market rate. So, it doesn't include your owner's salary. So from a business perspective, you should be paying yourself 40% as an associate, as your own clinic. After you pay that, what is the profit left over? Trust me, if there's a lot of clinics where the net profit is zero, but the owners are quite happy because they're making the same, they're basically, we used to say they bought themselves a job as an associate in their own clinic. It does not equal cash in the bank. It does not take into account capital expenditure. It does take into account depreciation or bank repayment. So when you buy your, say, a CEREC machine, that's not going to be reflected in your profit. If anything, it's going to be inflated. It's pretty tricky to calculate this these days because of the whole SFAs. Nowadays the income we take as a practice is minus SFAs, and it kind of screws everything up a bit. What we have to do in our software is we take the net profit dollar value from zero, because the dollar value stays the same, but as a percentage, we compare it to the overall production from the PMS software. I think a lot of people kind of get confused with EBITDA and profit. EBITDA is something that kind of gets thrown around a lot. It's earnings before interest, depreciation, tax, and amortization. The whole principle of it is you're trying to normalize profit by adding back costs. So if I was to buy John's clinic and I didn't require debt funding, what would be the profit based on that? It's got a really bad name these days because it can be manipulated really well. Let's say accounting standards can be flexible. N1's a good example of that. But it's still it's still predominantly used as the basis to value your clinic as a multiple. If you ever sell to a corp, they're going to say, look, I'll give you 4 to 5 times your EBITDA. So it's a good kind of thing to understand. Most of us who are skeptical of EBITDA these days say cash flow is probably the real deal. This isn't a business presentation, but I thought this is something that kind of bugs me a bit. Cash flow is the money that's moving in and out of your business. It's divided into 3 things. It's normally operating, investing, and financing. So operating is really, is enough money coming from the business sustaining you? There was I'm sure most of you guys know, there was a corporate that kind of went under last year, or was it this year or last year? And, I remember me and my friends, we used to go through their financial documents because they're ASX listed. And the biggest thing for me was, their operating cash flow was negative. It was financing that was keeping them afloat. So to me, they were insolvent for quite a while. And that's why cash flow, it's impossible to kind of hide the profitability of your clinic or the health of your clinic if you're showing cash flow. Now, despite the fact that I've said all this to you, take-home pay, which is profit plus your actual income as an associate in your clinic, for some of you, that's going to be the most important thing. I envy dentists who love clinical dentistry so much. I wish I was you, because here I am, trying to do this to kind of fill up my days because I'm not a massive clinical lover. If you love clinical dentistry or you love what you do and your take-home pay is adequate or is perfect for you, honestly, who gives a shit about the profit percentage, right? You're enjoying your life, you're making a good pay, a reasonable pay, or a pay that you're happy with, and you get to do what you love. To me, that's the dream. That's something that I aspire to. So forget everything else I've said. So finally, I thought I'd talk about the ROI of data analysis, and this is a commercial kind of terms. I think more importantly, there's also the benefits of improved patient outcomes, improved dentist retention, improved dentist improvement. But when you look at a particular financial kind of metric, And a good example of $1 million clinic, just because it's numbers at a 2-chair practice. If by measuring things and looking at some of these problems, you are able to increase the hourly rate of your dentist by just 3%, you would have an increase in patient fees of $30,000. If by looking at rebooking and working on that, you are able to increase, get one extra rebook per chair per week at a 2-chair practice, again, that's a $30,000 increase in your annual patient fees. By decreasing your expenses, if you have got staff pay, I'm not saying don't staff, but if you got it down from 25% to maybe industry standard 20%, that would have a $50,000 improvement to your gross profit. Right? Not just patient fees. So that's the reason. That hopefully this is making you understand why the big guys are looking at data now so much, because it pays for itself. It's the ROI is just not comparable to anything else. And if you're not looking at these analysis, you're really not doing your business a service. So finally, just so you know, all the KPIs, unless I've said that we haven't got it, are in our platform called Jeevan Analytics. We're integrated for Dental for Windows, Xero, and MyOb. A little special offer is that we are giving people who do a demo and sign up by the end of October, the first 2 months free. If you're a single chair clinic, we have a light version available for you. Any questions, you can email me at jeevan@jeev.com.au. I just made up the email. Hopefully I know how to use it. And yeah, you can book in a demo directly at our website. I think Rebecca's going to be sending the links, but there's actually a book demo feature function. I think about 4 or 5 dentists a week book a demo with us. So yeah, if you're interested, have a look. Okay.
Okay, thanks, Dr. Jeevan, for that. What I will do is I'll just let you know, and I did forget to mention this at the beginning, so sorry, guys. We are running a giveaway as well tonight. So I've just put the details in the chat. So if you snap a selfie and send it through to the email in the chat with your name and practice name and a contact phone number, the first 5 received will win a 1-hour training session with our training team. So if you have any questions about reporting or any of those sorts of things, I do recommend that you try and go into the draw to win the 1-hour training session, and there are going to be 5 of those available for people who have attended this evening. And what I will do as well, I'm just going to run a poll. If you do want to find out more, definitely just let us know through here. We'll be able to contact you and send your details through to Dr. Jeevan as well, especially if you want to find out some more information about Jeevan Analytics. Okay, so what I'll get you to do is, if you have any questions for Dr. Jeevan, we'll hold, stick around for a couple more minutes. And I just want to say thank you to Dr. Jeevan as well for your presentation this evening. It was very educational, and I hope everyone's taken away something from this session as well. Okay, so Emmanuel has sent through a question saying, do these things get tracked easily through Jeev Analytics?
Yeah, well, essentially that's what we do. Yeah, so that's our whole thing that we do. We track pretty much every KPI that you've seen here today is what our software does, and it does it all in real time. So the data is live basically every 1 hour it refreshes.
Yeah. Okay. Seth has just asked, what is the approx cost for 1 chair clinic for Jeev Analytics?
I shouldn't that. Seth's. I think it's on our website. Oh, that's really bad that I don't know that, isn't it? So our normal fee is $349 plus GST per month. Our single chair clinic is, that's really bad that I don't know that. Sorry, Gary. He's probably listening, shouting abuse at me right now. Check our website. I feel bad if I say the wrong number, to be honest. Otherwise, message me and I'll give you the exact cost. My apologies.
Okay, perfect. We have, I think it's Judith. She's asking, how does Jeevan Analytics or does Jeevan Analytics integrate with Practica?
That's not a question on the Centaur website. Not at the moment. No. So we are dealing with other PMSs. Practica is probably low on our radar at this stage. Not to say it won't happen. I do know that when you sign up with Jeev, if you're not a D4W user, they are given a special promotion. And we are, without being awkward here, we are working with some other PMSs, but Centaur have basically our product was based on Centaur initially, and it's where we've got a really robust relationship with Centaur, and it's probably our optimum service.
Perfect. A question from Amir: is your software customized for dental prosthetists, denture clinics?
The answer is no. I don't know. I don't know how much. Just being honest and thinking on the fly, I don't know how relevant, because I don't know if you guys do recalls or treatment plan unfinished. I would say, depending on investment, if your prosthesis can be fairly low, if I'm honest. Yeah, that's just me being honest. Amir, if you want to kind of give me some suggestions to make a prosthesis version, I'd be happy to look at that. But it's probably you're not going to get much bang for your buck if your prosthesis is my understanding.
Yeah. And Emmanuel has asked, is there a minimum sign-up term?
No, so we're like the Netflix. You don't like me, just kick us out. So it's month to month. Yeah, I hate locking contracts. I think that's, that means your product isn't particularly good. So for us, it's month to month. The day you're not happy with us, just get rid of us. Thankfully, we haven't had a single user cancel with us, which is pretty cool. But no, 100% no lock-in contracts. And the cool thing is that all the data is in your PMS. So if you stop using us, it doesn't really affect you at all. You just go back to your normal life. So you don't have to worry about us holding you hostage or anything like that.
Perfect. And then we just have one question about AI. So do you believe AI is going to become an important aid in diagnosis, or is AI more about detection? So I guess this is just your opinion about AI there, Jeevan.
Yeah. AI, it's when we did interviews for a whole bunch of programmers and when we started developing this, and for me and Gary, anytime somebody mentioned AI, it's always kind of a little trigger for me to think that they were maybe talking shit, because it's such a word you can throw around these days, unless you're Facebook and you've got it's. I think maybe AI might be the future, but I don't think it's the present at this stage at this level. If you're Facebook or you've got the or Google, maybe so. So yeah, maybe AI will be something in the future, but I just don't think it's as big as people make it out to be at this present time, personally.
Yeah. Okay, we've just got a couple more questions. So why, an anonymous attendee asked, why is active patient database defined as 18 months, not 6 months or 12 months?
Because we have to draw the line somewhere, it's an arbitrary figure, right? Like you got to define it somehow. Basically, industry standard, particularly in international markets, is 18 months. Why? You could say 12 months, you could say 24 months. Industry standard is saying it's 18 months, and that makes it easy to compare. But no, if I'm honest, there's no particular reason.
All right, guys. So I think that's all for our questions today. And I do appreciate your time, Dr. Jeevan. I do know it's been a very long day for everybody, doing a full day in the clinic and then coming and joining our webinar in the evening. So thank you so much for attending, and thank you, Dr. Jeevan, for your presentation this evening.
thank you so much, Rebecca. Really, really appreciate it. And thanks for having me.
Thank you. And this recording will be sent out to everybody early tomorrow morning. If you have any questions, further questions, I will include Dr. Jeevan's contact details and contact details for Centaur as well, just in case you have any questions for our training team.
Cool.
Okay.
All right. Take care, guys.
Have a good night.